So one of the things that I have enjoyed most during this pandemic is that I've been kind of watching my skill grow in the baking of bread. So I started the pandemic scared of so many recipes and producing so many terrible loaves of bread that never rose and that had to go and live their second life as bread pudding. And I spent the first part just agonizing over what's within my skill level. It turned out not much was. But in May, I started to get a little bit bolder, and I decided I would buy this book, Flour, Water, Salt, Yeast, which is like an artisanal baker's Bible, is how it's described for a lot of folks. And it gets a lot of praise on the internet. So I figured, hey, you know what? I bake bread. Let's try it. And I took one look inside and declared that I'd never bake anything from it. It just took too long. 2 days for a sourdough loaf. Never. But by now, every 5 days or so, I make a huge batch of sourdough bread from this recipe. It's a bread that we consume most often in our house, probably. And my comfort level with using sourdough and shaping loaves and taking multiple days to bake, well, it grew on you. And it grew on me, and I figured out that it wasn't so bad to try to make so much space in your fridge so that this sourdough loaf could come into being and taste great. But I was really intimidated at first. So Flour, Water, Salt, Yeast, this book was interesting to me, not just because it was a bread baker's Bible, but because of its intriguing name. Because you see, bread is really simple. It only has about 4 ingredients. You can add stuff to it, don't get me wrong, but in its most simple and classic form, it has 4 ingredients. And out of these 4 ingredients, you can make, and they're very simple ingredients, you can make something incredibly tasty, something nourishing, something that is a little bit of the taste of the divine is what I would say. It's some really good bread coming out. And because you can do this, and because it's only using a simple recipe and simple ingredients, baking bread is old. It's an old sort of art form. The ancient Egyptians used to make these conical loaves of bread that they actually let the summer heat cook in some ways, and at least finish cooking in the summer heat. And one ancient historian writing about them in a derisive manner called them dough eaters. It's a derogatory statement about what the ancient Egyptians were up to for their love of bread. But the Egyptians, they didn't care one little bit. Not at all. They loved it. And today you can see, as part of ancient history, I just marvel at this, at how connected I am to this group of people from far away and from a long time ago. You can see these elaborate pieces of art that they drew of these pharaohs and these princesses seated before sliced bread. Just something that represented to them, we might think of it as wholesome. They thought of it as just nourishment. And so they made these pieces of art in order to summon these slices of bread into the afterlife for ancient Egyptian mythology. And so they were saying, may you always be filled with good bread, even after you pass on from this realm. That's how important it was to them. Something I think about all the time, and I think it breeds a little bit of new ways of thinking about this prayer that we receive in the Bible that Jesus teaches about the daily bread that we're supposed to pray for in the Lord's Prayer. Give us this day our daily bread. Well, give us this day our sustenance. And I think there's a reason why bread is mentioned. And it's not just because of its poetics, but because of its essential, simple nature and the sort of nutrition that it can give. There's this simultaneous newness to me of baking bread and its inherently ancient existence that made me think of these short parables in a new light. The parable of the yeast in particular did not ever make my top 10 list of parables. And to be honest, I usually skipped over it kind of mentally when I was reading through these parables, because just because you're a minister doesn't mean that your eyes don't glaze over sometimes when you're reading a big chunk of scripture. But because my experience has changed and I've been working more with yeast, and I have this sourdough culture that I use every 5 days to make a lot of bread, well, my appreciation of that parable has changed a lot too. The life abundant is like leaven. Add a little bit to a mixture and pretty soon it pervades it all. Leaven has a unique quality to it. It only takes a little bit to make a whole mixture delicious and nutritious, but it takes time. And sometimes it doesn't happen on our time schedule. And I think that's what intimidated me when I was starting to bake, is 2 days. It needs 2 days to work in the fridge. what's that going to be? I can't wait that long. I got stuff to do. Well, with the pandemic, I have less and less stuff to do, so it's been okay. But the whole mixture becomes delicious with time, and not on our time, whenever it well decides that it's going to work, whatever time scale that it's going to operate on. And the other parables in this section are all like that, I think. They're simple images of what the life of faith can or should be like. They're taken from everyday life, and they're often packed with some real emotional content. I don't know if you noticed that. The leavening action of yeast is like magic to me. Still, after so many loaves, I'm still shocked in the same way that I'm shocked when I harvest potatoes. I stuck a potato in the ground, and I come back after a few months, and honestly, some neglect because I'm not really caring about the potatoes. And then I dig in the earth and I have more potatoes. Seems like magic to me. The smallest seed produces a shrub that's great for birds to nest in. Someone heard there was a treasure in a field, and they're going to make whatever sacrifices they need to get it. Surely we ought to make some sacrifices too for the life well lived and for the life abundant. They invite these real considerations of the emotional content of our everyday life and how we ought to approach the life abundant. I think it's kind of a quick list of, they're very quick and fast parables, and they're really interesting to me, especially the one about the net, which I'm not really a big fan of because it's got the whole weeping and gnashing of teeth thing. Not really my style, but okay, it's in that list. And a net is simple. I like nets. I like the parable of the unbroken net. That's nice. But this parable of the net's a little less nice. And so these simple images, and I have to confess, I'm always a little shocked by the question at the end that Jesus asks, do you get it? Well, they all answer yes, but I've always wondered about that. Anyone who's taught anything knows that you can ask a question, do you understand? And people will say, yeah, sure, I get it. Absolutely, I understand. They don't want to make you explain a second time. But do they really understand? Well, the only way you can really do that is to ask them to show you that they understand, or ask some sort of question that would demonstrate some knowledge about it to make sure that they do. But Jesus doesn't ask that. He sort of skips and says, do you get it? And they claim that they do. And I just don't think that I get it all the time, or even that I understand exactly what Jesus is going for in these parables. But I know what I take from it this Sunday. I take from them pretty generally a commitment that faith is supposed to mean something in our everyday lives, and the stuff that makes up our ordinary everyday lives. Our faith must count for something not only on the metaphysical level, but in this very plane of existence. It must be intimately bound up with buying and selling, with baking bread, with growing things, with casting nets, with how we interact with each other. Have you understood all this? Jesus may have asked the disciples, but I would say I definitely have not understood all this. Like I said before, that parable of the net is a prime example. I definitely don't understand what's going on there, or if I do, I don't like much of it. But I do think that if our faith is going to matter, it's got to pervade everything that we do. It's got to be like yeast. It's got to leaven the whole mixture. Your moral, ethical frameworks can't really occupy a peripheral space in your life. They have to change how you live. They have to change how you bake. Flour, salt, water, yeast, such simple ingredients give rise to the tastiest morsels I've ever consumed. In the same way, the life well lived will be filled with divine simplicity, simple gifts like Amy sang about just a little bit ago. I'm so appreciative of that music. Simple things, things we can understand. But whether or not we fully understand these simple things, or what Jesus has to say at every turn and venture, it's not in the mental grasp of things that we approach the life abundant. It's the living of life, the mixing of ingredients. The doing is always what counts. That sort of mixing and letting that life of faith pervade where you are in your everyday life. It's that mixing of ingredients. Thank goodness we don't have to understand to be able to do a lot of good. It's not required that we fully understand what Jesus says in parables, just like it's not required that we fully understand even what we're doing in our life. But when we seek the good, when we act for justice, when we talk about and live out in our lives an ethic of love that really hasn't let us go, and that we're going to bring that love into the world, when we enact mercy and have compassion, when we stop and listen to someone, really authentically listen, I think that we're really letting that life of faith pervade everything that we do. These simple acts, these simple moments, these simple times, they don't require understanding. They require enacting. They require doing. And that is something that I can understand. Maybe not every parable, maybe not every import of my action, but I can understand doing, loving, being, and acting in a merciful way. And I'm thankful for that. Thanks be to God. Amen.